This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Go to brilliant.org/SarahZ and sign up for free. Also, the first 200 people who go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
Hello, Dave and PJ. My name is Cindy, and I'm the president and CEO of What Pumpkin Games. We here at WP received your contact from Sarah Z after an associate spoke with her about the Homestuck video she uploaded today on 4/13. We were disappointed to learn that a member of your association published a video that promoted speculative false claims about our company from a known malicious actor who could potentially cause us to incur significant financial damages. She promoted these claims without seeking any comment from What Pumpkin prior to publication. We are not seeking compensation and will not take legal action provided that an acceptable correction is made immediately. We consider a text clarification below the video, a Twitter post, or any other form of retraction that does not involve either taking the video down or re-editing the video to correct the defamatory material to be unacceptable. Ms. C must also publicly acknowledge on all platforms that the original video contained disinformation and take responsibility for her lack of diligence in researching the video. The damage that she caused is already massive and irreparable, so we'd like to emphasize that we consider preventing further harm to our company to be a grave and urgent matter. We look forward to your timely response.
Well then. Okay, so if you, like I was, are utterly baffled by what the fuck just arrived in my inbox, let me explain. So on April 13th, I released a video on Homestuck written by me and my co-writer Emily that goes into the history of the webcomic Homestuck and its fan base and talks about its current direction. It mostly doesn't mention specific individuals aside from the comic's creator Andrew Hussey, a couple artists, and the studio that was originally going to develop the Homestuck video game. There was some speculation and there were some personal opinions in there, but for the most part, it was pretty much just a decade-ish long history of a popular webcomic. And before this video was even out on YouTube, some wild shit happened. A few people affiliated with Homestuck assumed it was going to be a hit piece, going so far as to call it that on a public platform, and were very frustrated at not being reached out to in the making of the video. Which on one hand, I do get, because a lot of the people who worked on the comic are trans and or people of color who have gotten a lot of hate, and so I understand the need to be defensive about the work mentioned. But given that the video didn't mention those people at all, bit weird. There were also some especially interesting posts by a former Homestuck writer telling me and Emily to choke on, well, there's the post. And this thing about cis women having opinions on trans representation, which, if you watch the video, there's a part about trans characters, which, as I repeat comically often in the actual video, was written by Emily, who is, by all accounts except for this one, a trans woman. But she's cis now, so cool. Hang on, let me just... Hey, Emily, how's being cis?
Oh, it's great. I got to go to the States for a gender reveal party we're doing down in Florida, which I haven't gotten to do since I did all cis sports back in high school. We went to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. I got to use the restroom uninterrupted. I even got to go swimming at the beach for the first time in years. It's just great. Just really great.
Nice, nice. Blow some stuff up at the next gender reveal for me, will you? We love that shit. But yeah, weird response in the first couple hours of that video going up. The part about contacting Homestuck writers was a bit strange just because, well, one, What Pumpkin, the company that does Homestuck stuff, is famously non-responsive to requests for comment, and secondly, I mean, it's a pretty big company. Homestuck is partly owned by Viz Media, the people who distribute stuff like One Piece. It would be like getting upset that the Sherlock video didn't have a section reaching out to Stephen Moffat, or that the Twilight video didn't have a section reaching out to Stephanie Meyer. Not to mention, everything talked about was just publicly available information, whether it was this thing happened in this year, or this is my personal opinion on Homestuck 2's writing. There was no insider information on the Homestuck 2 staff we were claiming to have that would require verification, nor do reviewers generally ask for permission to just review and give their opinion on the quality of a famous webcomic. So already a really weird day. But then I get a Twitter DM from a Homestuck adjacent account. I won't name the person because they asked me not to and were pretty chill about the whole thing. Later emails started calling this person Mr. X, so we'll just go with that. But I get this DM as I want to walk outside to deal with this already weird day, and I have to stop walking. So I'm just hunched over on the sidewalk reading these messages, and basically Mr. X tells me that one of the sources in the Homestuck video contained malicious lies, which is a very worrying and surreal thing to receive in DMs just hours after releasing a very long video. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. So for context, the most up in the air part of the video was a segment in the middle about developing the video game based on Homestuck called Hiveswap. In short, it was funded by Kickstarter backers with over $2 million raised and a projected release date of a couple years later. That was back in 2012, and after going through several different game studios and firings and various controversies, the full game is still not out, having only been half released at this point. The release of the game, or lack thereof, has been a huge sticking point in the fandom as people have tried to figure out what exactly happened to cause such long delays and such an overall change in direction. My video in particular talked a little bit about the fallout between Andrew Hussey and the first studio hired to make the game and later fired, The Odd Gentleman, or just TOG, and it pointed to two separate accounts of why this arrangement didn't work. The first came from a friend of Andrew Hussey's who went by the nickname IPGD, who said that it didn't work because TOG slacked off and didn't get anything done, not because they didn't have enough information to, but because they just didn't want to and were busy working on their own game. The second was broken by a blogger named Geo, who made two blog posts. The first mostly just compiling public information about the game and talking about IPGD's post, and the second claiming to speak with anonymous sources who worked with the company. Those sources alleged that Hussey didn't give The Odd Gentleman enough information to make a working game off of. To clarify, while I pointed to specific facts in those conflicting accounts that could be verified, I didn't say one was true and one was false, instead pointing out that both should be viewed critically. Basically, there were two sides to the story, and I presented both of them and told the audience to take both with a grain of salt. In case you don't believe me, here's what I said in that video. Some of these sources are anonymous, so take everything I'm about to say here with a grain of salt. I will say that a lot of the smaller claims are backed up, but still, don't take this as 100% fact unless there is a source there. I also don't want to get sued for reporting on this, so I'm not going to make any definitive statements about what happened here, rather just that this is what Geo and the people involved who Geo allegedly spoke to have reported on. This is hard to corroborate, but because this is also an anonymous source and it's not backed up by any specific thing Hussey says, you do have to kind of take their word for it. It definitely seems like Geo did their due diligence in reporting on this. They even created the super helpful timeline picture, but I think this is worth taking with a grain of salt. This is a pretty serious accusation, and again, it's not one I feel comfortable simply regurgitating uncritically. A lot of this comes from anonymous sources whose credibility I can't confirm. In the second blog post Geo made, he also talked to an anonymous source who alleged that The Odd Gentleman did uncredited animation work on Homestuck's finale scene, aka Homestuck Act 7. I once again make it clear that this was an anonymous source and to take it with a grain of salt, but did link to that blog post in my video description. This discrepancy of accounts was what seemingly set off What Pumpkin staff the most, as apparently the anonymous source that Geo used to talk about TOG doing secret animation work on Homestuck was a malicious ex-employee, and Geo himself was a stalker. This was something that had been alleged by two of the What Pumpkin staff previously during the day, and we were now being told via DMs that Geo's MO was, and I quote, similar to kiwi farms. So obviously this is all very worrying and you want to get to the bottom of this, right? So what Mr. X basically says is that according to his friends at What Pumpkin, Geo's source was malicious and a liar and was overall a really shitty person. The source was anonymous, but according to Mr. X, everyone was almost positive as to who it was. Mr. X also said that the studio situation was largely The Odd Gentleman's fault and not Hussey's, and basically said the same thing that the IPGD posted that they tried to reach out to the studio and the studio people kept going MIA. So, okay, glad to have that cleared up. I responded and said I'd be happy to make a pinned post or something to that degree saying so. To be clear, this didn't contradict anything said in my video, but it is additional context that it could benefit people to know. And Mr. X says, according to the What Pumpkin execs that he's speaking to, that's not good enough. I need to take the video down, delete everything to do with Gio's post, and then re-upload it. Which, no. First of all, like I said, nothing I said in the video was actually wrong. There's new information here, but nothing in the video warrants actual correction or removal. Second of all, if the Gio information was false or those posts about Gio being a stalker were true, I had not gotten any proof of that at this point. It was just a trust me, I know who the source was and he sucks situation. Third of all, if the source was indeed a shitty person, that's bad, but it doesn't make what the source said untrue, and I hadn't gotten any proof of that either. And finally, the video had a sponsor, and you can't just delete a video if you have a legal agreement with a sponsor, which I conveyed to this person. I said I'd do what I could, but I'd need to check with Audible before even starting to think about possibly removing a video. And then Mr. X sent me a message that his sources at What Pumpkin wrote.
It is in your best interest for both legal and professional reasons to take the video down. Read all the new information now at your disposal, and then re-edit and upload a new video reflecting the information that has come to light. It will not only protect you from potential legal repercussions and public backlash, but will earn goodwill with a Homestuck fandom that was very put off by this video appearing on 413.
Okay, so that escalated quickly. So I restated once again that I would need to message my agency Standard and check in with Audible to see if taking it down would even be an option. Some more conversation happens. I get shown an update that What Pumpkin is planning to release on the HiveSwap Kickstarter clarifying some of what happened, and I'm like, okay, if your Homestuck associates want to talk to me directly, here's my email address, and here are the email addresses of the people at Standard who do sponsorship stuff. And then two things happened. First, What Pumpkin posted an update to the Kickstarter backers, responding both to my video and to Gio's article. The update included the exact amount of money that Kickstarter raised when you account for fees, posted a copy of what the Odd Gentleman's demo looked like, and responded to the allegation from Gio's source about the studio being secretly contracted to do animation work on Homestuck by saying that it was true, but also that it couldn't have interfered with HiveSwap development. This is really interesting because they're talking about how untrustworthy and terrible Gio's source was, but then in their backer update saying the source was right about this previously secret piece of information. I want to stress that this was the first Kickstarter update that backers had received in months, and it was responding to the question of what happened with the Odd Gentleman, which happened in 2014. What Pumpkin declined to tell the people who paid to make the game what was happening behind the scenes that delayed the game coming out for more than 5 years. But the second someone with a platform talked about it, backers finally got transparency. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad the post went up, but it's frustrating that if I hadn't made the video, the people who paid to make HiveSwap would have just never gotten that update ever. Secondly, a couple hours later, that amazing email from the beginning arrived. What I showed you then were just a couple excerpts from it though. Here's the full thing, it's incredible.
Hello, Dave and PJ. My name is Cindy, and I'm the president and CEO of What Pumpkin Games. We here at WP received your contact from Sarah Zed after an associate spoke with her about the Homestuck video she uploaded today on 413. We were disappointed to learn that a member of your association published a video that promoted speculative false claims about our company from a known malicious actor who could potentially cause us to incur significant financial damages. She promoted these claims without seeking any comment from What Pumpkin prior to publication. And what's more, when Homestuck writer, a creative director at our company, reached out in multiple attempts to contact her following the publication of the video, she not only ignored our representative's communications, Miss Zed chose to make a public post disparaging our representative by name. She has since deleted the post, but has not made any apology to our representative. We finally managed to get in contact with Ms. Zed many hours after the publication of the video through an associate who's not formally employed by What Pumpkin. That person was able to clear up the disinformation that Ms. Zed shared in her video, and we're glad she appears to be amenable to issuing a correction, now that she's seen proof that the document she was promoting in her video contained false and libelous information. All of this could have been avoided had she simply requested a comment from the primary source before publishing inflammatory speculation about a sensitive legal settlement. However, she indicated that her sponsorship with Audible prevents her from taking down or re-editing the video, even with our mutual agreements that the content warrants correction. We understand that Sarah Zed is very young, and her irresponsible, unethical journalism is the result of ignorance and not active intent to damage our company. We also recognize that the defamatory content in question is a small part of the video, and we're not seeking changes to any other segment unrelated to the matter of these false claims. Nevertheless, that small, thoughtlessly included segment, as well as her choice to link directly to libelous documents in the video description, poses an enormous financial and reputational risk for our company. We are not seeking compensation and will not take legal action provided that an acceptable correction is made immediately. We consider a text clarification below the video, a Twitter post, or any other form of retraction that does not involve either taking the video down or re-editing the video to correct the defamatory material to be unacceptable. Ms. C must also publicly acknowledge on all platforms that the original video contained disinformation and take responsibility for her lack of diligence in researching the video. We're hoping that by getting in contact with you, that you may convey to Audible that it is in the best professional and legal interest of all parties involved to allow a re-edit of the video to remove the false content. Ms. Z's large platform has already forced us to invest significant time and resources into combating the disinformation that she chose to spread. We may need to pay thousands in legal fees in the process of reviewing the necessary documentation related to our settlement, so this is not at all trivial to us. The damage that she caused is already massive and irreparable, so we'd like to emphasize that we consider preventing further harm to our company to be a grave and urgent matter. We look forward to your timely response. Cindy Dominguez.
What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? So, okay, there's so much here. I do want to flag the part about how What Pumpkin apparently might have to pay thousands of dollars in legal fees because of the Kickstarter update they put up, though, because that's going to come up again later. So just remember that she said that for right now. Just internalize that they apparently had to go into emergency mode because they realized they would have to inform the people who backed the game 8 years ago exactly what happened to this thing they paid $2.5 million for, and they didn't think to do this until some YouTuber named Ms. Zed decided to make a video about it. One thing that I want to say here is that I am extremely lucky to be affiliated with Standard when I make videos, an agency that has things like its own streaming service and helpful resources for creators and, you know, actual lawyers. Because if I hadn't been able to talk to people at Standard about both messages implying the possibility of legal action and consult about whether anything I said was actually defamatory, I can see some alternate version of myself getting intimidated into taking a video down just to play things safe. Luckily, I did speak to Dave Wiskus, Standard's CEO, and get advice from some actual lawyers who were like, yeah, you're fine, and we're willing to back you up if this escalates. But the fact that I can so easily see how this could work to intimidate creators who say negative things about the company is incredibly infuriating, and I can see what an effective, albeit hilarious, silencing tactic this could be. Much like What Pumpkin, we take this stuff seriously, which meant that on the 22nd, 9 days later, Dave sends them back a reply. Before I show you what Dave said, I think it's important to note that despite this being a very urgent matter that needed to be addressed immediately, otherwise it would cause harm to the company, no one from What Pumpkin contacted us in this time. I'm not sure why, considering how worried they were about us damaging the Homestuck brand. Perhaps it was because at this point word had begun to spread about the legal threat and people were not happy. Regardless, here's what Dave had to say.
Cindy, I am sorry for taking so long to get back to you. I needed the extra time to respond to your condescending and, in my opinion, defamatory email with the appropriate professional tone. You mentioned an unrelated third party getting in touch with Sarah, and I have confirmed that to be true. That person, Mr. X, asked to remain anonymous. Mr. X did offer supposed first-hand knowledge regarding the odd gentleman's actions and omissions. However, Sarah has not received any independent proof of Mr. X's statements. Feel free to share any documents related to the matter in question, and I am happy to pass them along to Sarah. Although Sarah was under no obligation to do so, she posted the relevant statements from Mr. X in a pinned post beneath her video and removed the link to the second Geo article. I think that adequately gives the non-TOG side of the story, which was itself included in the video already, further visibility, and served as a thoughtful and adequate response to the new information raised by Mr. X. Frankly, I don't understand why you care about statements made about TOG. Weren't they the developer before What Pumpkin took over? Are you claiming now that there were untrue statements made specifically about What Pumpkin in the video? You refer to a settlement agreement that you have to pay lawyers to analyze. I assume that it is a confidential settlement with some third party related to development of the game. I don't know what the terms of that settlement are, and I fail to see how that is relevant here. Surely the settlement agreement doesn't make you responsible for Sarah's independent reporting. Although content creators represented by Standard are responsible for their own content, Standard is not afraid to bring its own resources to bear to assist creators in fighting off frivolous threats. We take the rights of creators very seriously, and we are of the opinion that Sarah has handled your accusations with class and poise. I think that you should be satisfied with the action Sarah has already taken, and I recommend that you drop the matter. If you want to further share your side of the story, YouTube remains a platform accessible to all. But I consider this matter closed, and I have encouraged Sarah to avoid any more engagement on this topic. Sincerely, Dave.
So things settle for a couple days, and then two things happen. The first is that I get a Twitter DM from Mr. X apologizing for passing on the legal threat and calling it extremely secondhand cringe, which is very funny to me, but no hard feelings. And the second is that Dave's email got a reply from Andrew fucking Hussey. One thing to note is that while all of this was happening, What Pumpkin put out a statement revealing that Andrew Hussey no longer officially works with the company, having quit in early 2020 and just having never announced it. Despite having done official What Pumpkin business since then, like the stuff with the Homestuck Reddit and the Homestuck 2 Patreon post, and also right now, apparently. By the way, the announcement uses they/them pronouns, and while they said on Twitter that any pronouns are okay, this video will use they pronouns for Hussey for clarity's sake. So Hussey emails Dave. All of the ensuing emails are going to be very long, and so only some segments will be voiced, but if you want to read this entire email exchange in all its 18,000 word glory, feel free to pause at any point.
Hi Dave, I was just forwarded this email chain, catching up on this now and stepping in to hopefully resolve some conflict here. Some background first. I'm the creator of Homestuck, but I stepped away from What Pumpkin last year. This information only became public recently, so not many people knew I haven't been too involved in the company operations for a while. But as the creator of the IP, I'm still around to advise and consult with What Pumpkin staff, so I'm helping to resolve this before it gets out of hand. For Sarah's understanding, I'll try to briefly explain why What Pumpkin reacted as they did. The staff at What Pumpkin who composed the original letter were blindsided by Sarah's video on 413, and mostly were disappointed that no primary sources from What Pumpkin were consulted for the opportunity to correct mistakes with the reporting before publishing the video to a very large platform. I guess things got a little heated at What Pumpkin, but at the same time, I get where they're coming from, and I hope Sarah can too. As you know, our friend quickly told Sarah that the blog included unreliable information, and she promptly removed the link to the more toxic article, which we appreciate. Some more background on that. The actual informant to that article is someone we've known about for years, someone who is very destructive and vindictive personality who actually did a lot to cause serious problems during the Kickstarter planning. But what's done is done, so hopefully more constructive things can happen moving forward than trading vague legal threats or doubling down on some of these questionable sources and rumors which appeared in the video. The truth is that if Sarah had come to some people here first, due to being fans of her work, many would have been happy to supply all kinds of answers about the history of the Kickstarter, and many more topics. I think this is still a possibility if Sarah is willing to do more follow-up reporting. If she wants to make a follow-up video, it could include the potential to reveal a lot of information that's never been shared before. I don't care much about policies of secrecy, and I don't think many at What Pumpkin do either. Much of these rumors about the opacity of What Pumpkin are a bit overblown. If you can forward this to Sarah, I'd appreciate it. Please let her know I'm available for follow-up clarifications on any of this, and others at What Pumpkin can be too. Thank you, Andrew.
So this was now becoming more a thing than I ever thought that it would. I think it's important to disclose that around this time, it became pretty clear that a follow-up video was going to be done because this had already turned into such a clusterfuck. Additionally, at this point, we had started receiving messages from a lot of people, particularly ones who used to work at What Pumpkin. And I came to learn that, just like Andrew said in their email, things at What Pumpkin weren't as bad as our video originally made it seem. They were worse. Over the coming weeks, I spoke to several former employees at What Pumpkin, some of whom reached out to me and some of whom I later reached out to confirm or deny some things I heard. Once again, I want to emphasize that these are the testimonies of folks who worked with the company, many of whom asked to be anonymous for fear of repercussions. As a result, take everything I'm going to say here critically. With that said, a lot of ex-employees had some words to say about the company. One person I spoke to who worked not at the What Pumpkin NYC game studio, but in closer proximity to Hussey, described their experience as like 10 million HR violations a day, talking about how the company allegedly had no HR department at the time, and thus a lot of inappropriate behavior was ignored or excused. I will say at least that someone else I spoke to who worked at What Pumpkin NYC, the game studio arm of the company, said they eventually got one at the actual game studio. When it came to those people at the studio who weren't working directly under Andrew Hussey, most people I spoke to said they had positive experiences and enjoyed working there up until the point where they talked about working under Hussey themselves. One person I talked to who definitely had the most positive experience out of everyone I spoke with described working on the game as a lot of fun, saying, "We were given a very wide creative berth with what we could do for the most part, which was really satisfying." From speaking to them, it sounded like they really liked their time working on the game, calling it the best job they've ever had, but even they noted that there was not really a whole lot of communication from above. They talked about wanting to be more open with the fan base, but getting resistance each time, noting that the lack of communication worsening over the years has gotten frustrating. Other people I spoke to had much less positive things to say. One source, who we'll call Roger, talked about how great their immediate superiors were, how much fun and freedom they had working on the actual game, but that it all broke down when it came to actually working with Hussey themselves. Roger said, "The communication with Andrew was awful. They were making decisions without even considering us at all." They spoke about Andrew Hussey seeming disinterested in the game, not wanting to even look at the 3D game at times. According to them, Andrew was very hands-off. "I was desperate to show my work and get critique on it, but they just kept telling me to wait." Another person, a former artist who worked on the game who we'll call Alice, not her real name, talked about how she had trouble getting in touch with Hussey if needed, citing an instance where another artist who raised a concern about game credits was straight up ignored. The real issues, though, come with the post-mortem of What Pumpkin NYC. If you remember from my last video, I spoke about how in 2015, a large volume of the staff was abruptly fired with no warning, despite employers telling them everything was fine and that those people received no kind of severance pay or credits. Multiple people we spoke to were able to point to specific assets they designed that ended up in the final game despite never receiving any crediting for it. In Roger's words, "We crunched and finally had an engine that ran a game that was starting to look good. Nevertheless, they were later fired. This happened not only without warning, but according to Roger, they were specifically told after asking that they shouldn't look for another job. They told me, halfway through the job, I started panicking because I just have a gut for when things go south, and things felt like they were going south. I asked sincerely if I should look for another job, and they insisted I should not. I asked if they were having money problems, and they laughed at me and said, no, of course not. Then they let one of the animators go and cut others' hours down. The vibe of the office was way less optimistic, but there was hope. I do recall a meeting where they said they were getting more money and not to worry. It was shortly before we all got fired. As you know, it's easier to find a job when you're already employed. So to tell me that I shouldn't look for another job and then fire me without warning was, to put it lightly, cruel. And yeah, it really is. As previously mentioned, Alice told us that she knew of at least one employee who still worked there at the time who allegedly attempted to ask Andrew about the crediting situation but was ignored. According to Alice, upon seeing that she hadn't been credited, she sent an email asking for a copy of the NDA so she could review whether or not it contained a right to credit. It didn't, apparently. Alice told me that she received a response back not from Cindy or Hussey, but from their lawyer, who falsely accused her of breaking said NDA and told her to never contact the two of them again. As such, talks of crediting ended there. If that's true, that's pretty damning. The crediting situation is important because creators live or die by their credits. The games industry is not a big one, and it's really competitive, meaning these credits are all you have to market yourself. Let me explain. There's just a way bigger supply than there is demand for employees in the game industry, and that inherent replaceability of many employees means it's 1, common for workers to have to withstand things like poor compensation or hardcore crunch in order to stay in that industry at all, and 2, hard for said workers to unionize and fight back against management when they need to. Because the industry is so hyper-competitive and because folks are often having to make large personal sacrifices to keep doing what they love, credits are extremely important. Usually, if you're trying to get a job at a professional studio, you need a certain number of credits on shipped games just to apply, including in entry-level positions. Again, there's much higher supply than demand of this labor, so this isn't a problem for employers. As a result, it's generally 1, extremely important in this industry more than others that people receive credit for their work, and 2, quite common and accepted for people to fight to get credit on games that they've rightfully done a lot of work on if for some reason they aren't credited. In Alice's words, the studio was mostly made up of women developers, a group that's a lot more likely to experience discrimination in the games industry, and a group for whom it's particularly important to credit work. That's not to say I think Hussey was being intentionally sexist here, or that it would be less bad if this weren't the case, but rather, a lack of crediting is likely going to hit this team harder than it would others, which is a particular harm it's worth taking note of. I will say, at this point, with the information we currently have, that while including someone's work in a game but not crediting them is fucked up, it is frustratingly common in the games industry. What isn't common is sending someone a legal threat based on false information because that person asked to be credited. This is another thing to remember because the question of crediting people for their work on the game is going to come up later and it's going to be worse than we thought, so just remember that for the future. It's very clear talking to everyone that the closure of What Pumpkin NYC hit them pretty hard. Not only did it come out of nowhere, but What Pumpkin seemingly didn't do anything to help that transition or to make it easier on anyone. Employees were left without severance pay, apparently because there wasn't any money for it. Many were not contacted for a follow-up at all. There apparently wasn't a safety net in place to help secure the fired staff to new jobs or positions elsewhere, or just make things less shit for them. Artists with skill sets that could have easily transferred over to 2D Hiveswap were let go without any real explanation why. The whole thing is honestly just very depressing. If any of this sounds familiar, it's because it matches a lot of what was said in the previous Homestuck video regarding Gio's article. This is important because it's going to be a huge factor later on. After all, we were originally contacted because we didn't approach primary sources and instead relied upon an article written by someone apparently with a bias against the company. But now here we were asking former What Pumpkin employees directly what happened and getting basically the same response. So this is the situation I'm in, having received this email from Andrew Hussey and also having this information about how former employees were apparently treated by the company. It's very odd to be casually conversing with the person whose company just sent you a vague legal threat for slightly criticizing them. On the other hand, if I ever want to talk about any of this, the right thing to do is get the other side of the story, both for accuracy's sake and because it's just the right thing to do. So I email Andrew, I say I'd be willing to speak with them, and they respond with this.
Before I continue, one point of disclosure that seems relevant is I didn't actually watch the video and still haven't yet. I felt it was important to first make it clear I'm not operating from a position of hard feelings about the video or anything like that. I simply haven't watched it, and even if I did, whatever sort of negative editorializing it may contain is a non-factor to me. I've seen more than my share of critical takes over so many years, so for the record, before we go further, I have no issue at all with any reporting in the past or future which is unflattering to Homestuck or the historical events surrounding it. I'm just here to help my friends get some satisfaction in their desire to have their voices heard in this story, as well as to help you produce more accurate and interesting follow-up content, if that's what you want. Have you had time to think about how you want to approach this?
Well, okay then, I guess they haven't watched the video. Cool. I love the dig about more accurate and interesting follow-up content sentences after telling me they didn't watch the original content. Incredible. But I soldier on, wanting to both be professional but also honest about the fact that the information I currently have is critical of the company and providing a list of relevant questions that I'd like to have answered. So I ask 1, what can you tell me about the Kickstarter? 2, why do several of your employees keep publicly calling this Homestuck blogger a stalker? And 3, why did you say Geo's source was malicious and inaccurate? And finally, I ask them, after receiving the email from Cindy, I've been looking online a bit and speaking to some people who used to work for What Pumpkin, and I've heard some pretty upsetting things. I've seen some people make posts implying they've received legal threats over the years for being critical of the company, and I've spoken to some people with What Pumpkin NYC who talked about how the 2014 mass firing was preceded by a lack of communication and superiors repeatedly denying any financial hardship on the part of the company up to days before people were fired. Do you have any response to claims of miscommunication or legal threats? Is any of that true? So Hussey responds with a novel that I'll shorten for everyone's sake, but that you can pause and read the entirety of if you like.
First of all, it needs to be said that transparency isn't a black and white concept. There are literally thousands of facts associated with the Kickstarter and subsequent game dev efforts. Many instances of transparency on the level desired by certain sectors of the fandom would unavoidably involve throwing a lot of people I've worked with under the bus, which is something I've been historically reluctant to do. The way I've generally handled such events is to say I could either publicly trash the person who just did a bunch of bad things, or I could try to be a little bit more diplomatic, put a positive spin on the new direction things are taking, and just keep moving forward while rallying efforts of everyone still remaining to repair the damage caused by destructive individuals. This approach may be frustrating to those who are dying to know all the internal details of a turbulent production, but experience has told me this is the only rational way to handle things if you want a project to continue and not see it be completely destroyed by unnecessarily inflaming drama and pointing fingers at people who cause problems and are gone anyway.
Okay, Andrew Hussey. Andrew Hussington, founder of Witch Pumpkin, creator of Homestuck. This was a Kickstarter-funded project. You raised over 2 million United States of America dollars exclusively from your fans and proceeded to leave them in the dark about where their money went or what was happening with it over the course of several years. Let me be clear that crowdfunding from thousands of people instead of private funding sources isn't a way to be accountable to no one. It's a way to be accountable to thousands of people. It turns what could have been a private game development affair into a public one. Framing people who want to know what's happening with the game as a bunch of drama-hungry vultures and acting like you owe no one any kind of explanation is incredibly unfair to these people. Like, I understand that acting like these folks are all just doing drama alert shit about the inner workings of the company is the easy way out, but it's really disingenuous when this was a project funded by and created for fans. Anyway, Andrew then goes on to respond to my saying it seems like these people only got transparency because someone with a large enough platform talked about it. As in, it seems like if I hadn't made this video, this information would have stayed secret indefinitely. Andrew says,
one take is that the doors to these explanations only opened after you posted the video, which is a take I don't really blame you for having. But the alternative take is a possibility which was never tested because you posted it before you had a chance to find out. Which is that, if you or someone with a platform of your size had approached What Pumpkin asking these questions or attempted to clear up any misunderstandings between two opposing theories about the Kickstarter, these answers would have been provided because no one at What Pumpkin would want such a visible broadcast to include that sort of misinformation.
Okay, so it literally is just because a person with a large enough platform talked about it. Cool.
The truth is, I don't think anyone with a significant platform showed any interest in covering the Kickstarter events on the level of detail that you or Geo were diving into. Any demands for the types of extremely fine detail you see in Geo's blog always appeared in small minority pockets of fandom, if they even existed at all.
This is literally just not true. If you remember back in my original video and earlier on in this one, I talk about that second account of what happened at What Pumpkin, the one from Andrew's friend IPGD, the post that talks extensively about why What Pumpkin got screwed over by the odd gentleman. That post is currently standing at 17,493 likes and shares on Tumblr. Clearly, there is an audience for people who want to know the details of what happened with the game development at What Pumpkin. That post, 1, would not have gotten made in the first place, and 2, would not have been liked and shared nearly 20,000 times if nobody cared about the behind-the-scenes details of the game whose creation they paid for.
I think there was a serious risk that any corrections given to him would have been weaponized to continue portraying events negatively, and our corrections could easily just be undercut by further misinformation from his lying source. The totality of this situation, in addition to the fact that hardly anyone was even looking at his blog, I think he only had a few hundred followers, made it apparent the best thing to do was to ignore him and allow his blog to pass as a relative non-event in the grand scheme of fandom history. One of your questions was whether I thought Gio was a stalker. It's my personal take that he probably does not technically qualify as one, but I also don't think it's a simple no either, given his antagonistic fixation toward people at What Pumpkin, and his persistent invasiveness has made the women at What Pumpkin uncomfortable. Suffice to say for now, I don't trust him. I will never speak to him, and probably no one from What Pumpkin ever will either. On the other hand, I'm perfectly happy to share some information with you, since I can see from your track record that you've made a lot of good videos where it looks to me like you're interested in putting at least some effort into figuring out what's true, rather than just maximizing the damage done to the targets of your reporting regardless of what you find out.
Okay, so let me just break this down. So this dude blogs about a bunch of video game related stuff, but in this case about Homestuck, using a mix of publicly available information and anonymous sources. I can't claim to be a judge of this guy's character, but looking through his blog posts and tweets, I didn't see any kind of targeted harassment or bigotry, just posts about accessibility and digital security and liking Homestuck and generally pretty progressive content. Like, there's no Gamergate shit or personal attacks or really any large volume of content about anyone at What Pumpkin, at least nothing I can see from looking. And based on this reply, it seems like the label of stalker just gets thrown around because the dude is persistent about criticizing the company for not being transparent and used an anonymous source that may or may not have lied to him. Still nothing about what information there was false, so that part's still unclear. It's, to me, incredibly fucked up to defend some of the public faces of your massive company smearing a small blogger to a large audience for being persistent about criticizing that company, and to equate that to actual stalking. If there is any actual stalking that took place, I didn't see evidence of it in this email, and Andrew didn't seem to indicate that there was. So for now, all we have to go on is that the blogger has been labeled a stalker for making 2, I counted, it was a grand total of 2 at the time, blog posts criticizing What Pumpkin. And to brazenly admit this to me, incredible. I guess this makes me a stalker now too, so how are we doing, stalker gang?
If What Pumpkin was able to respond so quickly after your video with a new Kickstarter update sharing that information, why not just share that information a long time ago, which could have theoretically averted a situation like this? It was more of a measure of last resort. What Pumpkin had a post like that on file, which is why it was able to be posted pretty quickly. It was just somewhat edited to suit the purpose and address some of the specific claims.
Wait, hang on, repeat that again?
What Pumpkin had a post like that on file, which is why it was able to be posted pretty quickly. What Pumpkin had a post like that on file.
Wait, but that's... No, let me just go back to Cindy's original legal threat email. What did she say again? She said, Ms. Zed's large platform has already forced us to invest significant time and resources into combating the disinformation she chose to spread. We may need to pay thousands in legal fees in the process of reviewing the necessary documentation related to our settlement, so this is not at all trivial to us. The damage she has caused is already massive and irreparable. Okay, holy fucking shit. So Cindy emails and says that it costs the company significant time and resources to write that Kickstarter post, that it might cost them thousands of dollars to make that post and address the rumors, that it did them massive and irreparable damage. And here's Andrew just casually admitting to me that no, that post was actually mostly pre-written ages ago and that only minor modifications of it were made to fit my video. Holy shit, this is my second email ever with Andrew, and they're already just casually admitting that the original legal threat email seemingly included completely made up damages? It really looks like What Pumpkin literally just made it up to send us a threatening email. I'd be offended about this, but I'm actually kind of delighted at how casually we already had this post written up way before your video was thrown out there. Andrew then tells me that the office primarily closed not because of anything mentioned in any blog posts or by employees, but because of inappropriate behavior by one particular person. So they say,
so far, it looks to me like you put some value on discretion by honoring Mr. X's request for anonymity, and it looks like people from your team do too, like Dave. This is a good sign, and if I didn't get that sense, I may not have stepped in at all here. Given that you're working as some form of reporter here, I don't think proposing an NDA makes sense. So all that's really left is to explicitly ask if you are willing to handle the facts I give you responsibly when it comes time to publish content. By this, I don't mean spinning the narrative a certain way. I mean, before you record everything you're planning to say, come to some mutual agreement with me on which names, job titles, or other personal information should be masked, or if there are any particularly explosive or compromising facts that could put anyone in an unsafe position. We consider ways of artfully sidestepping those facts without disrupting the truth too much. Can you agree to this?
Yes, you have done well, child, to spare my liege his dignity. And who is your keeper? Dave? All good tidings. For this reason alone, I have made myself known to you. If I had sensed immaturity in your tone, I'd have destroyed you where you stand. Okay, but seriously, what? Let me stress that Andrew reached out to me to tell me I got some things wrong and that they'll tell me more if I reply. And then I got negative testimonials from former What Pumpkin employees. And then I email Andrew and ask what I got wrong and if the testimonials are true, and I get this reply asking me to artfully sidestep the facts. One, they reached out to me, and two, I'm not asking about this information to sate some kind of personal curiosity. I'm asking because, as I said in that first email, I might be making content and I want to do my due diligence. So I say thanks and ask some more questions. You note that, with the exception of a blog post, no one was overly concerned about the business details prior to my video. What I'm particularly curious about here is the release of the post by IPGD, the one I mentioned in my video that discussed what happened with the odd gentleman. The fact that the post was released at all seems to indicate, to me, that there was an audience interested in learning more about those details. Did you know about the IPGD post at the time it went up, and were you monitoring the response to it all? What I'm wondering about at the moment pertains to the bad actor who you've mentioned who has engaged in some pretty vindictive behavior and isn't a reliable source regarding Hive Swap development. Since that source appears to be the person who released the information about Tog doing animation work on Act 7 of Homestuck, side note, this information turned out to be true, I'm particularly curious about which specific aspects of his testimony are untrue. Although I can assure you that I intend to handle any information you might give me with care and responsibility, I can't grant final say over a video script or guarantee the avoidance of any facts that might paint What Pumpkin in a negative light. As such, while I am happy to listen to and report on your perspective on what happened regarding Hive Swap development and to take care to protect the identities of any anonymized sources, I can't promise to sidestep any specific facts without knowing what they are. I understand that not being able to give you this blanket confirmation may make you less willing to share this information with me. In either case, however, I appreciate your time. Andrew once again responds with a lot, so let me break it down as best as I can. First, in a lot of words, Andrew basically says, well, okay, some people were generally interested in what happened at the company, but nothing specific, and it became more of a thing after the IPGD post. I didn't write it, and I didn't ask her to write it. It's just that she could say stuff we couldn't because she wasn't under NDA at the time, and I didn't want to say more because we'd just signed a settlement a few months prior. Hussey also says,
the reason this exchange is happening is because your video provoked an extremely negative backlash against What Pumpkin, probably the biggest I've ever seen as well as the most negative. I think 1 million views is more attention than I can recall any media piece on Homestuck ever getting, and regardless of how positive or negative it was, the type of negativity I'm talking about here isn't about critical reception to certain works like Homestuck Squared. It's about mixing in a lot of misinformation, which seems to have galvanized many of those negative sentiments, or turned minor or sleeping fandom grievances into major active ones. And it would be one thing if I were the target, but since I stepped away earlier last year to focus on other things, I feel like the people who are bearing the full brunt of this negativity are those still charged with bringing Hiveswap to completion, which now feels like it must be done under a new cloud of hostility.
Okay, one, Andrew still hasn't watched the video at this point. And two, 1 million is definitely not overwhelmingly more views than other Homestuck related media has gotten in the past. It's extremely easy to find other media pieces on Homestuck that are older than mine and do very similar work with very similar view counts. Like this older one by the RPG Monger that has a little under 1 million views and, much like mine, recaps the creation of Homestuck, or this older one by Izzy's about the Homestuck fandom that also has 1 million views. I don't know if this is meant to be like a guilt trip of some kind, but whatever it isn't true.
I'm not approaching this topic from a standpoint of legality regarding the way you went about researching your video. This is more about basic courtesy. It's still the case that no one at What Pumpkin knows why you didn't seek comment from anyone here before posting, which would have been a simple way to dispel a lot of the misinformation. And in some cases, hard evidence could have been used to disprove certain claims. What Pumpkin also still isn't sure why you singled Homestuck writer out as someone who couldn't be trusted to get comments from. Someone mentioned to me somewhere you publicly interacted with Geo to tell him you felt vindicated in believing Homestuck writer couldn't be trusted as a source.
Not true, this never happened. I actually reactivated my Twitter to search through my tweets looking for any response to Geo to make sure this never happened, and it didn't. Not sure who told them this, but it's untrue.
Having said this, it's still not my intention to approach our conversation with language that sounds either litigious or accusatory. So I'm not literally asking you why you didn't consult with What Pumpkin, and I'm not trying to force you to answer for these decisions here. Instead, I'll just offer what my sense has been about this from the beginning. It seems to me that anyone trying to investigate these matters begins from a confusing starting point and is limited by the fact that they don't know what they don't know. If an investigator did know certain key details already, they know how to better approach
we also
gathering
know there
more
are
facts,
known unknowns.
which
That is to
topics
say,
or
we know
landmines
there's
to
some
be
things we
careful
do not
with,
know.
etc. You asked a few questions here, but you didn't seem to address the point near the end of my previous email, which was that I preferred to move through these events as a process, which should have a particular starting point. By starting with the insane events of NYC that went unreported, this should help you begin to see what I mean when I say these were miserable experiences for What Pumpkin staff in ways that were totally beyond anyone's control. You may even begin to develop an appreciation for why What Pumpkin's original note to Dave was worded as strongly as it was. Cindy had to personally travel to the vacated NYC office and haul out smashed equipment herself. The events being poked at here are a lot more serious than the way the rumors have been framing them. I also think the truth of the NYC events shouldn't just be dismissed as irrelevant because your video massively elevated Geo's version of events. Some key themes of that report were things like What Pumpkin mishandling the concerns of the NYC staff, being callously uncommunicative, or the idea that I closed the studio on a whim. None of that is true. But you don't need to believe me just because I say so. I have email transcripts of what happened and can share them. But if you're not interested in understanding the events on that level and would prefer to keep hopping around the timeline, asking questions in a way that's disconnected from understanding the totality of what it's been like for What Pumpkin to deliver this game, I don't think I can continue supplying information. I need some sense that you care about understanding the toll it's taken on the people at the center of this, and how the way your video is currently framing these events has enormously compounded the suffering already caused by a series of events which had, for the most part, been put to rest. Are you willing to read the story about how the NYC studio really closed.
I just really would like to emphasize one more time that Andrew Hussey was the one who reached out to me. Andrew Hussington emailed me to tell me I got information wrong. Andrew Hussington's comics company's president emailed my agency to vaguely threaten to take legal action because I supposedly got information wrong. And now that I've replied several times now asking specifically what I got wrong and what the truth is, I've gotten several replies that 1, admit to having never seen the video, and 2, are just refusing to tell me, asking if I really want to know the story of how the company closed. You emailed me! You sent your friend to DM me on Twitter with threats over the information I supposedly got wrong, and now you don't want to tell me what I got wrong. What is happening here? So I say this. This email, unlike the others, is uncensored and unshortened. I flat out just say, thanks for getting back to me. This was admittedly somewhat frustrating to read. You initially contacted me in order to tell me I'd gotten specific details wrong and so that I could use your account as a reference point in any future content. I've since repeatedly informed you that I am happy to listen to your side of events and that I will take it into consideration for the production of any future content. I've restated my willingness to listen in every email since, but I nevertheless seem to be getting several replies that express hesitation to tell me anything, which is curious given that you contacted me. Let me unequivocally restate that yes, I am willing to listen to your side of what happened at What Pumpkin if you are willing to share it. If you don't wish to share your account of what happened, then there is no reason to continue with this conversation and any future video content will be made without it. So a couple emails later, I do get some information about the company closing. For the sake of people's privacy, I'm not going to share any specific details about this besides the basic gist that yes, if what Andrew showed me is true, What Pumpkin did hire someone who later turned out to behave in toxic and inappropriate ways, and because of the person's position, it supposedly required them to shut things down really quickly. To that end, I think that's helpful information about the closure of the company, and I understand the difficult position that can put an employer in. According to Andrew, this person has been spreading false rumors about the company online for a long time now. What I will say I didn't get was any information about any specific false claim this person made that 1, was in Gio's article, or 2, more importantly, was in my video. There was this general illusion that this toxic ex-employee is lying about us online, but nothing that actually relates to like what things were said, what things were lies, and why a bunch of Twitter DMs and threatening emails got sent over it. Or, for that matter, how a person could manage to convince several former What Pumpkin employees that their workplace and employers were bad. Like, dozens of people don't just suddenly get tricked into believing they're all being treated like shit by their employer without reason. And the people who messaged me with first-hand personal grievances, not hearsay or he said, she said, they said shit. If said person was lying, then what were they lying about, and why were so many people willing to believe them? On the whole, Hussey doesn't tell me about any specific lies this person spread about the company at all, especially none that relate to my video, or even Gio's article for that matter. Just the general idea that there exists an employee out there who was a bad person and makes things up about the company. That's not to say this person wasn't being toxic and aggressive if what Andrew sent me is true they were, or that they couldn't have lied a bunch, but I didn't get anything that indicated that my video, which already encouraged people to take the articles with a grain of salt, platformed any false claims in the first place. So I say, the primary point of confusion for me in terms of questions still relates to the claims made by Name Redacted. I am still not entirely certain what distorted rumors and poisoning the well specifically entail. Were specific false claims made by Name Redacted that later got picked up in the video or article? Which parts does this context make untrue? So far, this information serves as helpful contextualization, but I am still uncertain as to its specific relation to the unreliable information about which you initially contacted me. Is there any final information regarding the specifics of Name Redacted's involvement, the aforementioned factual inconsistencies, or What Pumpkin's development process that you wish to share? AKA, what was I wrong about? Why did you contact me? Why did I get a legal threat over any of this? Andrew says,
since Name Redacted put in more work socially connecting with many members of the staff, they believe him and start listening to his counter-narrative, which is something to the effect of, this studio closed spontaneously for unfair reasons, was horribly mismanaged, and the reason you aren't hearing anything from them now is because they just don't care about you. Again, paraphrasing. We were clearly trying to bring people back, and we would have happily communicated more with the staff if it didn't feel like doing so would put people at risk. We were all working pretty hard to save everyone's job for months leading up to the freeze, starting with the date of TOG settlement, which revealed we had much less runway left than originally thought. Sadly, the incident made that impossible, but the immediate effect of the poisoning process was to split the former staff into two groups, a smaller group who wasn't poisoned, and a larger group, which seemed to form a clique briefly after the closure. After they met a couple times, I'm sure they all dispersed to get different jobs, and most of these people barely had anything to do with each other after that. But the poisoning persisted, and most probably to this day have a serious misunderstanding about what happened. I think the most harshly vocal critic about it was Alice. I recognize her as one of Geo's anonymous informants by the testimony, which I've seen her post elsewhere. I've also seen her post substantially more vitriolic versions of those sentiments elsewhere, where she was publicly calling me and What Pumpkin out by name. Later, she was contacted and reminded she was still under NDA, and I think she removed the posts after that.
So a really interesting thing here, if you remember her name from earlier, Alice was actually one of the people we spoke to before contacting Hussey. She was the person who went uncredited and claimed that she had tried to ask What Pumpkin about her NDA, only to be met with a legal threat for supposedly breaking said NDA. According to Alice, What Pumpkin screen capped a Reddit post, falsely claimed it was me, or that I was at least openly telling people about the company because I was the only one in the studio who worked with my husband, and the Redditor explicitly mentioned my friend and her husband. His lawyer said that I'm breaking NDA and would come after me if I continued, and also said I couldn't go work for them ever again. Obviously, I was shocked, as I was not the person making the post, nor do I know to this day who it was. It sounds like, based on Hussey describing her being contacted and reminded she was still under NDA, there's some truth to what she has to say. So yeah, we were familiar with Alice. Hussey had no way of knowing that though. We never mentioned Alice's name to them at all, they just decided to bring her up unprompted, which is interesting. We'll explore that more later. Hussey then links to specific parts of Geo's posts that were apparently, in their words, poisoned by the toxic person.
Down to the side channel fundraising header, that entire section is skewed by the name redacted narrative. That this was a spontaneous and callous mass firing with no explanation. Having the incident as context makes it all make more sense, but that context is missing from the article, making this material misleading, and puts What Pumpkin in a very awkward position in terms of offering a defense, since to do so would reactivate the concerns over whether reporting this would put people in a compromising position.
So, okay, the information here wasn't wrong, but rather misleading because they didn't have the proper context. The context that What Pumpkin hadn't provided until this point. Okay, so with all due respect, what the fuck does any of this have to do with any misleading info either in the article or in my video? In the section that Hussey linked to, the anonymous source claims that they were not informed of HiveSwap's switch from 3D to 2D. Then Alice's post says that the incomplete HiveSwap trailer was posted without telling the art team, that they were told the company was in good financial state, that they weren't given severance, that Hussey threw away an essentially completed game in order to reboot HiveSwap. None of those things are made better or untrue by the existence or context of a toxic or abusive ex-employee. The only thing that Hussey can really say is that without the full story, it makes What Pumpkin look bad, but they're not denying that any of this stuff happened anyway. Hussey then links to another part of Geo's article, the one explaining the lack of What Pumpkin NYC credits on Act 1 of HiveSwap. It's at this point that they, once again unprompted, reference Alice.
I know that she was the one leading the charge on the credit issues because she sent us an email about it after Act 1's release. In it, she requested credit in a friendly tone, citing a few minor things appearing in Act 1, like a font design she contributed to, and small touches to character like the gold trim on one of outfits. Probably under ordinary circumstances, I would have replied to this in a friendly way, and even if her claims didn't totally track, if I recall correctly they didn't after consulting with some others, I'm sure I would have erred on the side of caution and just credited her. But this was a pretty crazy email to get, because it wasn't even long before receiving this that I saw her in public spaces saying wildly vitriolic things about me and What Pumpkin, repeating the false points from the name redacted narrative and such. After consulting with the staff on it, it seemed like the team was in agreement that there wasn't much substance to her claims, and even if there was, she'd already publicly burned the bridge with What Pumpkin for anyone to be inclined to make the changes to the credits over such small points. I can at least acknowledge there's a chance some of her influence in the NYC build leaked through to the next version in small ways, and it wouldn't have been off base to credit her. But this is pretty much the only situation I can think of like that. No one else from the NYC team went improperly uncredited.
Whoa. Holy shit. Did I read that right? Did Hussey just admit that they deliberately didn't credit someone who under normal circumstances would be credited solely because they thought she was talking bad about What Pumpkin online? I've been working on this story for months and they just emailed it out. So like, is it just me or is this fucked up? Like, really fucked up. Like, here we have a game studio, a supposedly professional game studio with investors and shit, and the head of a multi-million-dollar brand just casually admitting that they didn't give someone proper professional credit for their work solely because said person might have said some things that made their time working for them seem not great. And I want to note that, once again, nothing Alice said in her one public post that was referenced in the article was inherently incorrect. She didn't even say that she was working at What Pumpkin NYC or use anyone's name in it. She talked about how she didn't feel like she was communicated with during the project and then got quickly fired without support, which is a totally valid interpretation of the events. She got fired from her job and lost her insurance and wasn't given severance. And apparently this was enough for Hussey and the rest of the team at What Pumpkin to decide that after an email that they admitted to be friendly in tone, to not give her any credit whatsoever on the project. Also, by the way, that thing about Alice being the only one who wasn't credited isn't true. I spoke to at least one other person who didn't get credit either, and Alice gave me the names of several other people, including her husband, who apparently didn't receive any credit. I was able to look over the list of names and compare them with the Hiveswap credits, and no, Alice was not the only person who wasn't credited.
I'm not even saying I think Alice is terrible or anything. I don't. I can easily see from her perspective that it looked like What Pumpkin really did stonewall the former staff for no apparent reason. I also have no doubt that if she actually knew about Name Redacted's behavior, she would have distanced herself quickly from him rather than embrace his narrative. I think it's pretty likely she would have been hired back if not for getting poisoned by his influence.
So, okay, you can see from her perspective why she would feel displeased with her time at What Pumpkin based on what she experienced and what she knew. But instead of explaining what happened or just keeping that she didn't have the full side of the information in mind and crediting her, you instead just cut her off entirely and also allegedly sent her a legal threat. You even admitted that you didn't hire her back specifically because of this, when most of her problems with the company were the fact that she was just let go so suddenly and without any other job or other resources to help keep her up. Fucking ghoulish. Let me once again restate how insanely competitive the gaming industry is, how having your name on the credits for games is often quite literally a prerequisite for even entry-level jobs at a number of established studios, how many insane personal sacrifices people in the industry will make to work on games and to get those credits. To not credit someone because you just didn't think to is one thing. As I said earlier, it sucks, but it's also frustratingly common in the games industry. But to purposefully deny someone credit for a game they helped make on a petty whim, someone you admit would have otherwise been credited because they criticized your company's shady work practices online, and to openly admit to this with no obvious indicator that you recognize how genuinely awful that is to do is absolutely baffling to me. Hussey then goes on to answer the second question I asked regarding what false claims were made in my video and how the context would change them.
The short answer is I don't know yet, because I still haven't gotten around to viewing the video, which I can soon.
They still hadn't watched the fucking video! You contacted me. Your company sent me a legal threat. You've sent several emails now over weeks of contact, and you still hadn't watched the fucking video. You can just go watch the video your company threatened me over, you know? You can just do that and then reply to my email. That's allowed. Hussey talks about how this was mainly about disproving the points made in the Geo article, which cool, except one, Hussey still hadn't actually done that, and two, I am not Geo and I did not write those articles. Those articles had been up for months now. They had been spread around. Hussey and What Pumpkin could have addressed everything as soon as the articles went up. They could have messaged this to Geo so that he could take down or edit the articles. Based on those emails, they were already aware the articles existed, but instead they're contacting me for citing public blog posts that had never been publicly disputed by What Pumpkin before because I referenced and linked to them in a video that Hussey still hadn't watched yet and told people to take them with a grain of salt.
But even if the blog wasn't linked at all, it sounds like parts of your video contain discussions of those claims, which is more difficult to address than taking links down, since those claims are stuck inside the footage. To fact check anything there, it seems like now would be the right time for me to review the whole video and take some notes.
Gee, you think? 3 days later, on May 23rd, Andrew Hussey emailed me back.
I did finally get around to watching the full video.
Thank fucking God. Anyway, now that they've seen it, I'm sure they can start to point out specifics in terms of false claims and things that I've gotten wrong in the video, and...
Circling back to a question you asked earlier about Geo's source...
So, okay, at this point, Hussey begins to go in detail about who they assume to be Geo's source for his second article, an unnamed employee who is in charge of a lot of What Pumpkin's contractual dealings and played an important role in the managing of the Kickstarter and early Hive Swap development. Because of the potentially sensitive nature, I'm not going to reveal much about this, but I'm honestly not sure I really need to. The basic meat of it is that, according to Hussey, a lot of the messiness of early Hive Swap is this guy's fault, and that eventually an event came up that caused Hussey to have to cut contact with him, an act that said former employee is still bitter about, and he now spends his time trying to spread negative word of mouth about What Pumpkin. Although Hussey doesn't give me this guy's name, this is a different person from the other employee from before who's also still bitter about being fired from What Pumpkin for inappropriate behavior and is spreading malicious lies about the company everywhere. There's not much to say here. Hussey didn't provide us with any name, so I can't verify who said employee is or if he even was Geo's source. And it doesn't really tell us anything new about HiveSwap's development either, beyond the fact that apparently some unnamed guy was at fault and not Hussey. It's interesting to note that apparently twice in HiveSwap Act 1's development, Hussey apparently placed a sloppy and ultimately untrustworthy employee in an important position who then proceeded to screw everything up and set the project back, and once fired proceeded to spread toxic rumors about the company. And once again, none of this goes against anything I specifically said in my video, so once again, I'm still very confused why I was even contacted and what this was all about. I think the only claim in Hussey's email that actually touches on anything I said in my video is Andrew telling me that the reason The Odd Gentleman wasn't credited for their animation work on the Homestuck finale is that they asked not to be. That still wasn't a claim I regurgitated uncritically in my video or anything like that. All I said was that the idea that they did animation work at all was, and I quote, hard to corroborate, but that it's possible that they did uncredited animation work for Homestuck, which they did. But nevertheless, I will say that according to Hussey, it's because they asked to be anonymous. No proof was provided to me for this, but if that's true, then yeah, fair enough, and it's worth me saying that to y'all. That was, as far as I can tell, the only thing in the email that came close to referencing anything I said in my video. It was clear at this point that Hussey was a dead end. After weeks of correspondence, for them to just keep avoiding the question over and over and over again, it was obvious that this really wasn't going to go anywhere. They were just gonna keep giving us the ring around over and over, muddying up the pool with more and more barely relevant information. So this is, sadly, the last of the Husseygrams. They did say they liked the video, which I guess is something. I did get one more email shortly afterward, which I'm not going to do a full read through of, but that I will share with you here because it's extremely funny. It's from Cindy, the woman who sent the original email to Dave with the threat, and who I suspect also composed the message that Mr. X sent me over Twitter. In it, Cindy apologizes for the legal threat in the funniest way possible while still making sure to scold me, saying,
The members of our team were and still are really hurt by your video. Not because you said critical things about Homestuck projects. everyone's free to have and share their opinions. It hurt because it amplified a number of damaging lies that make it difficult for us to keep doing our work on Hive Swap. It elevated and legitimized someone who has not only been antagonistic towards us for no apparent reason, but who has developed an obsessive vendetta against us and allied with a vengeful and dishonest ex-employee who it sounds like Andrew has told you about already.
Okay, but did it, though? Because we've literally been corresponding for about 18,000 words, most of them Andrew's, and none of these people have actually been able to name a single claim I made in my video that's not true. The fact that something is bad and embarrassing for the company and makes the people who work there feel bad doesn't mean it's false. And I have asked them over and over and over again to tell me what I said that was false, and all I ever got was that there are people out there who are malicious liars. Cool.
I'm only able to be this honest with you because I know Andrew has shared with you some of the background details no one has heard before. I still wish you would have gotten in touch with us before publishing your video, but that doesn't justify the anger in my email to Dave. My team was just really hurt by the video's amplification of the misinformation about us, and in the moment I let my emotions and frustrations get the best of me. It wasn't the right way to handle things, and I apologize for that.
And listen, I'm glad I got some kind of apology, but it was a spur-of-the-moment decision fueled by my emotions as the kind of apology you send for texting your ex at midnight, not the kind of apology you send when you're the president of a company that's raised millions of dollars and you send someone numerous thinly veiled threats to sue them. That's not the kind of thing you just go, oopsie whoopsie, we did a fucky wucky to, especially not when the entire rest of the email is still just lambasting me for supposedly making false claims. False claims that not a single person who contacted me has been able to point to. I do want to say that I understand where Cindy is coming from here to the extent that the people working at What Pumpkin had to deal with several employees who were allegedly really awful people and who probably had a lot of them in crisis mode. To see an article where you're pretty sure that person was used as a source, irrespective of the truth of anything in that article, has gotta feel bad and maybe even re-traumatizing. And I'm not saying that to claim this is Gio's fault because, well, this has never been public knowledge until now. I think Cindy's email called Gio and this person co-conspirators, and well, that's obviously not true. I'm not a fan of the way a lot of the emails implicitly or explicitly painted both my video and the Gio post as bad for allying with a vengeful ex-employee when no one even knew about this person being shitty before now. I still don't even know who this person is. Or even the situation with Alice and asking for credit, where Andrew admits they told no one about this toxic ex-employee but still blames Alice and calls her troublesome for going off of the only information she had at the time, which is that she was fired with no warning, support, or credit, and then refusing to add her name to the credits list after the fact and after she asked, as though she was intentionally being malicious and troublesome and not acting on information they chose not to give her. If it really was dangerous to give people like Alice or Gio this context, then okay, but you can't then punish them for not acting on information you refuse to provide. But still, I'm sure having to respond to all those emails and tell me about it was not a pleasant experience. Andrew and Cindy both seem to have done stuff that I would describe as bad, but I still empathize with them here, and I'm sure telling me about the situation wasn't easy. And to Andrew and Cindy, because I'm sure you're watching this, I hope this time you're watching this, I know it's possible that, given the critical conclusions this video has come to, the emotional stress of bringing this up and rehashing it to me may not come out seeming worth it in the end. I hope you don't assume, based on the conclusions I'm coming to, that I'm just some snarky asshole acting in bad faith. I recognize the stress the situation would have placed on anyone in the position of an employer here, and I'm sorry that's the case. What I don't agree with is the continued insistence upon trying to scold me and retroactively justify threatening me for making my video. A video that, as far as I can tell by these correspondences, didn't include anything untrue in it. While I recognize the emotional reaction that, oh shit, this popular video linked to an article that probably used an awful person as its source can create, that doesn't make the video contain false information, that doesn't make anyone a malicious actor for speaking with a source literally no one knew to be a bad person, and it doesn't make the way other employees at the company claim to have been treated, or the way I've continually been spoken to, okay. I recognize that you are hurt, and I sympathize. but none of this is okay. Fortunately, that's the last of my correspondence with What Pumpkin. I didn't reply to Cindy's message, as I honestly have nothing to say to her, and I never got any more hussygrams either. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure I'll get an angry email in my inbox when this comes up. Maybe even another legal threat if What Pumpkin is feeling really spicy, but that's pretty much it, at least for now. So what do we take from all this? Frankly, I made my first Homestuck video having a less than positive, but not that negative perspective on What Pumpkin based on everything I read and saw online, and a month and a half later, I can say that my perspective has only gotten a lot less charitable to the company than before. Whether it's the various stories I heard from former employees reaching out, including some especially awful ones from folks who asked not to be included in this video, or the way various faces of the company seemed to be perfectly happy labeling someone who, to the best of my understanding, just wrote a couple critical articles using the only information that anyone was willing to provide as a stalker, or the way they spoke to me throughout this whole ordeal, or the many numerous times throughout this exchange that Andrew Hussey casually admitted to some seriously messed up things. Offhandedly telling me that the Kickstarter post was already written up and just slightly modified, while the original email used to threaten me bemoaned how my video forced them to invest tons of time and maybe thousands of dollars to make the post. Casually admitting to purposefully denying an employee credit for a game she helped make as some kind of punishment because she said some critical things about their company, things that they themselves gladly admitted were reasonable concerns from her perspective, and then allegedly threatening her over a post that, according to her, she didn't even make. Everything comes together to paint the picture of a company that's happy to frame anyone who questions and critiques them as unreasonable, whether that's as drama channel vultures, or malicious stalkers, or young, irresponsible, libelous, bad journalists, despite having made and casually admitted to some serious fuck-ups. I came into my last video still loving Homestuck despite having a lot of critical things to say about the comic and some of the people who made it, and I'm leaving this one frustrated that the company was able to carry on for so long at all. I don't know what happens from this point on with Homestuck. This is hopefully where my part of the story ends. I can only hope that What Pumpkin gets their shit together, that they start treating their employees better, and that they created a better work environment. Because this history of seemingly mistreating employees and going on the attack toward anyone who shows them any kind of criticism is only going to serve to make things worse and worse for them going forward. Will people still want to work with them in the future? Will people still want to talk about the games if any coverage comes at the risk of receiving harassment, both of the online and legal variety, from official members of the team? I don't know, shit's fucked. Anyway, as always, this is Ms. Zed and my cis co-writer Emily signing off. I talked a lot in this video about video game development. At this point, given how long people have waited for Act 3 of Hiveswap, it would probably genuinely be faster to just learn how to code and make Act 3 yourself. And if coding and computer science are things you're interested in, I have great news, and that's that Brilliant is an absolutely amazing website to learn how to do that, and also my sponsor for this video. Brilliant is essentially an interactive, hands-on problem-solving website with all kinds of interactive puzzles that you can use to learn about things like math or science or coding or computer science. I've been taking the mathematics and the computer science fundamentals courses on Brilliant, and they're honestly really fun. They've got all kinds of specializations like probability and astrophysics and programming with Python. So if you want to do something like get started on a webcomic based game or just learn all kinds of cool and really important skills in a super fun way, Brilliant is the perfect place for you to check it out and learn more. Just go to brilliant.org/SarahZ and sign up for free. And as a special bonus, the first 200 people who use that link are going to get 20% off the annual premium subscription. That's the one I've been using, and it's incredibly cool, so check it out. On top of a big thank you to all my patrons, I would like to specially thank Corey Frank, Alter Sill, and Bash Vax for joining my $20 plus tier. Welcome.